Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Shattered Mirror. Trent Holloway never believed in premonitions until that rainy Tuesday when a chill ran down his spine during a business meeting. The successful architectural firm owner excused himself to check his phone, finding 3 missed calls from his mother. When he finally connected with her, her words demolished his world. "Trent, it's Bryce. There's been an accident on Mount Rainier." His identical twin brother, the daredevil who'd never met a cliff he wouldn't climb or a risk he wouldn't take, had apparently slipped during a solo hiking expedition. The search and rescue team found a body at the bottom of a ravine, the face unrecognizable from the fall, but the wallet, backpack, and distinctive titanium watch confirmed it was Bryce. Trent's hands trembled as he canceled meetings and drove home through the Seattle downpour. He and Bryce had been inseparable growing up, complementary forces, with Trent the calculating planner and Bryce the impulsive thrill-seeker. Though they'd taken different paths in adulthood, their bond remained unbreakable. Or so Trent had thought. His wife, Vivian, was waiting at their lakeside home, her striking figure silhouetted against the picture window. 5 years together, and sometimes Trent still couldn't believe she'd chosen him. The former interior designer had collaborated on several of his firm's projects before they'd fallen in love, or what he believed was love. "I made some calls," she said, embracing him. "The funeral home is handling everything. You don't need to identify the body. Your parents have taken care of it." Trent nodded, grateful yet hollow. "I need to see him, Viv." "The coroner advised against it," she replied, steering him toward the leather sofa. "They said the damage was extensive. Better to remember him as he was." Something in her tone struck Trent as odd, but grief clouded his perception. He retreated into memories, recalling how Bryce had been acting strangely during their last meeting 3 weeks earlier. Distracted, checking over his shoulder, asking peculiar questions about Trent's marriage and parents. "Everything all right between you and Vivian?" Bryce had asked. "Never better," Trent had answered automatically, though, truthfully, things had been strained. Vivian had been distant, taking mysterious calls, disappearing for hours with vague explanations. Now, as Trent sank into numbing grief, he didn't notice Vivian slipping away to make another private call, her whispers too low to hear from the living room. "It's done," she murmured to someone. "He doesn't suspect anything." When she returned, her sympathy seemed perfect, practiced, but Trent was too consumed by loss to register the hollowness behind her eyes. The next morning, Trent's childhood friend and current business partner, Dominic Russo, arrived with coffee and solidarity. Dom had grown up with the twins, understood their connection, and seemed genuinely devastated. Yet when the conversation turned to the funeral arrangements, Dom appeared unusually interested in the details of Bryce's will. "Did he ever update it?" Dom asked casually. "After your parents transferred the family property to both of you?" Trent frowned. "Why would that matter now?" Dom backpedaled quickly. "Just thinking about you, man. Making sure everything's in order during this nightmare." As preparations for the funeral progressed, Trent found himself isolated in his grief. His parents, Preston and Martha Holloway, handled most arrangements with uncomfortable efficiency. His mother couldn't look him in the eye, which he attributed to how much he resembled Bryce, while his father seemed oddly resolute, almost impatient for the proceedings to conclude. The night before the funeral, Trent found himself alone in his home office, staring at the last photo taken of him and Bryce, arms around each other at Thanksgiving, identical grins beneath different haircuts. As he traced his brother's face, a notification pinged on his laptop. A new email from Bryce's account had arrived, time-stamped 10 minutes earlier. The subject line, "Not what it seems." The email contained only a password, Summit Twins 1986, and when Trent entered it into Bryce's cloud storage account, he found a folder named Insurance. Inside was a single video file showing Vivian in an intimate embrace with someone whose face remained just out of frame. Trent's blood ran cold. Before he could process this betrayal, Another ping, this time from his phone. A text message from Bryce's number glowed on the screen. I'm not dead. That's not me in the casket. Chapter 2. Whispers from the Grave. The funeral home buzzed with hushed conversations as mourners filtered past the closed casket. Trent stood robotically beside it, mechanically accepting condolences while his mind raced with questions. The text message and email had kept him awake all night, but his attempts to call Bryce's number had gone straight to voicemail. Vivian remained glued to his side, her hand possessively clutching his arm. Trent noticed how often her gaze darted to his parents, who hovered near the entrance, intercepting guests with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. You're very quiet, Vivian whispered, squeezing his hand. Just processing, Trent replied, studying her features for any sign of deception. The woman he'd shared a bed with for 5 years suddenly felt like a stranger. Across the room, Dominic chatted with Trent's uncle, Wayne Prescott, a financial advisor who had always been closer to Bryce than Trent. The two men seemed engaged in serious conversation, occasionally glancing toward Trent. When the service began, Trent found himself distracted by subtle inconsistencies. The eulogies painted a version of Bryce that felt sanitized, as though his memory was being deliberately reshaped. His parents emphasized Bryce's recklessness that finally caught up with him, while glossing over his achievements and vitality. After the final prayers, as mourners proceeded to their cars for the cemetery procession, Trent's phone vibrated in his pocket. "Where are you?" he had texted earlier. Now came the reply. "Can't say. They're listening. Don't trust your wife and our parents." Trent nearly dropped the phone. His eyes darted to Vivian, who was watching him with sudden intensity. "Who's texting at a funeral?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Work emergency," Trent lied, pocketing the phone. "Nothing important." The graveside service passed in a blur. Trent found himself staring at the casket, wondering who, if not Bryce, lay inside. As the first handful of dirt hit the polished wood, Trent made a decision. That night, he would get answers. After the reception at his parents' suburban home, where Trent noted the conspicuous absence of personal photos of Bryce, he feigned exhaustion to escape early. Instead of driving home, he parked near the cemetery and waited for darkness. The groundskeeper was easily bribed, and by midnight, Trent stood before his brother's fresh grave with a shovel. Hours of desperate digging brought him face to face with the casket. With trembling hands, he opened it, steeling himself for what he might find. The face was indeed unrecognizable from trauma, but something about the build seemed wrong. This man was similar to Bryce in height and coloring, but subtle differences in bone structure caught Trent's trained eye. He took photographs with his phone before carefully resealing the casket and replacing the soil. Back in his car, another text arrived from Bryce's number. "Now you know. Meet tomorrow, 10 a.m. That coffee shop where we built forts. Come alone or I disappear forever." Trent drove aimlessly through the night, his world fragmenting. The coffee shop referenced was Timber Beans, where they'd spent childhood summers building elaborate forts from napkins and stir sticks while their mother worked. No one else would know that detail. When he finally returned home at dawn, Vivian was waiting, her face a mask of concern. "Where were you?" she demanded. "I called everywhere. I needed space," Trent answered coldly, "to process my brother's death." "You're covered in dirt," she observed, her eyes narrowing. "I went hiking. Bryce's favorite trail." Vivian's expression shifted subtly. "You should shower. Your parents are coming over for breakfast. They're worried about you." Trent nodded, watching how quickly she reached for her phone once he turned toward stairs. He quietly doubled back to listen. "He's acting strange," she whispered urgently. "I don't know where he went last night. Yes, I've been checking his phone, but there's nothing. The funeral went as planned, but what if he knows something? Should we move up the timeline?" Trent retreated silently, his suspicions confirmed. Whatever conspiracy had claimed his brother's identity now threatened him too. He had less than 24 hours to prepare for a meeting that could explain everything, or lead him into the same trap that had ensnared Bryce. Chapter 3. Parallel Lives. Trent arrived at Timber Beans 30 minutes early, positioning himself in a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances. He'd taken precautions, leaving his phone at home wrapped in Vivian's scarf to make it appear he was still in bed, borrowing a barista's laptop for a quick search on the man he'd found in Bryce's grave, and withdrawing $5,000 in cash from an ATM far from his usual haunts. The search had yielded a disturbing discovery. The deceased was likely Lyle Mercer, a homeless veteran with a passing resemblance to the twins, reported missing 3 weeks ago. The implications twisted Trent's stomach. Someone had deliberately killed this man to stand in for Bryce. At precisely 10 a.m., a hooded figure slipped into the opposite seat, keeping his face angled away from the windows. "You were always punctual," the figure said in Bryce's voice, causing Trent's heart to lurch. "Show me your face," Trent demanded quietly. The man slowly lowered his hood, revealing Bryce's familiar features, though now sporting a beard and a jagged scar above his right eyebrow. "How do I know it's really you?" Trent whispered. "We're identical." Bryce smiled sadly. "Remember when we were 10, and you broke Mom's crystal vase? I took the blame because you'd already been grounded for setting off the smoke alarm. You promised you owed me one, a promise you still haven't paid back." Relief and fury washed over Trent simultaneously. "You let me think you were dead." "I had no choice," Bryce replied, eyes constantly scanning the cafe. "They've been planning this for years, Trent. Our loving family, your devoted wife. They're after everything we own, everything we are." For the next hour, Bryce unraveled a conspiracy so twisted that Trent would have dismissed it as paranoia if not for the evidence he'd already uncovered himself. Their parents, facing financial ruin after a series of failed investments, had concocted a scheme to consolidate the twins' considerable assets, the inheritance from their maternal grandmother, the successful architecture firm, and a valuable family lakefront property. "But why fake your death? Why not mine?" Trent asked. "Because you're the responsible one with all the business connections," Bryce explained. "They needed you functioning to maintain appearances while they executed the rest of their plan. Your signature on documents, your face in meetings." And Vivian? Bryce's expression hardened. "She was never what she seemed. I discovered she's been having an affair with Dominic for at least 2 years. They met in college. Their relationship predates your marriage. She targeted you deliberately when she learned about her family's wealth." Trent felt physically ill. "Dom? My best friend. Your business partner who's been systematically siphoning funds from the firm," Bryce confirmed. "I tracked the money to offshore accounts. The plan was elegant. After my death, the combined grief and betrayal would drive you to suicide. They even have a timetable. How would they ensure I'd kill myself?" "They wouldn't have to," Bryce said grimly. "Vivian has been adding untraceable sedatives to your evening whiskey for months, building up your tolerance. The night after my funeral, tonight, she'll increase the dose dramatically. While you're unconscious, they'll stage your suicide, complete with a note confessing to embezzlement and expressing guilt over some fictional involvement in my death." Trent's mind raced through recent memories, recognizing the signs he'd missed. Vivian's insistence on preparing his nightcap personally, his inexplicable fatigue each morning, her careful questions about life insurance and his will. "Uncle Wayne is involved too," Bryce continued. "He's the financial architect behind everything. And our parents." His voice cracked slightly. "They sold their souls when they lost their retirement funds in his investment scheme. Sacrificing one son seemed acceptable when weighed against bankruptcy." "How did you uncover all this?" "Accidentally at first. I overheard Mom and Wayne arguing about the timeline 3 months ago. Then I noticed someone had accessed my cloud accounts. I started investigating, installing surveillance equipment in various locations. The evidence piled up until I confronted Wayne, thinking he was operating alone. That's when I realized the full scope. Why didn't you come to me immediately?" "They were watching too closely. And honestly, I wasn't sure if you were involved," Bryce admitted. "Vivian had been feeding you stories about me for years, that I was unstable, jealous of your success. I had to be certain where you stood. So you let them think they'd succeeded in killing you? Who was the body?" Bryce's eyes darkened. "I didn't let anything happen to Lyle. I discovered their plan too late to save him. They chose him because of our similar build and they knew the fall would make identification difficult. They stole my personal effects to plan on him. Trent processed this horror, his architect's mind already constructing a retribution blueprint. "What's your plan now?" "Disappear," Bryce said. "I have new identification, offshore accounts they can't access. I came back only to warn you." Trent shook his head slowly, the Holloway ruthlessness their grandmother had often noted emerging like a dormant predator awakening. "No, they don't get to win. They don't get to take what's ours and destroy our lives." "What are you suggesting?" "A counterplan," Trent said, his voice hardening. "They think I'm the predictable twin, the safe one. They have no idea what I'm capable of when betrayed." Bryce studied his brother's expression, recognizing something primal reflected there, the mirror image of his own capacity for vengeance. "What do you need from me?" "First," Trent said coldly, "I need you to remain dead. Your resurrection is our nuclear option. Second, I need access to everything you've gathered, recordings, financial trails, all of it. And then," Trent's smile contained no warmth, "then we dismantle their lives piece by piece, just as methodically as they plan to destroy ours. By the time we're finished, they'll wish they'd never conceived this plot." As the twins finalized their approach, Trent felt a calm clarity descend, the same sensation he experienced when solving particularly challenging design problems. Only this time, he wasn't designing a building. He was architecting complete destruction for those who had betrayed him. "Tonight, they expect to find your corpse," Bryce said soberly. "What will they find instead?" "The beginning of their nightmare," Trent replied. "They want me dead? Fine. Let them believe they've succeeded. The dead can't be threatened, but they can haunt the living until madness takes hold." Chapter 4. False Funeral. Trent returned home with a transformed mindset and a precisely calibrated plan. The architectural precision that had made him successful in business would now serve a darker purpose. He found Vivian in their bedroom, selecting a black dress from her closet with practiced solemnity. "There you are," she said, feigning concern. "Your parents called again. They're worried." "I needed to clear my head," Trent replied, watching how her eyes tracked his movements. "I think I'll have a drink before they arrive." A flash of anticipation crossed Vivian's face before she composed herself. "Let me fix it for you. You've been through so much." "Thank you," he said, noting how she positioned herself between him and the bar cart. Her back turned as she prepared his whiskey with 2 extra steps he wasn't meant to notice. The uncapping of a small vial, the careful stirring to dissolve its contents. When she handed him the amber liquid, their fingers brushed, and Trent marveled at how normal this moment would have seemed just days ago. Now he recognized it as attempted murder. To Bryce, he toasted, bringing the glass to his lips but not allowing the liquid to pass them. Vivian watched intently as he pretended to drink deeply, then placed the glass on the side table. He swayed slightly, blinking hard as though fighting sudden drowsiness. "Are you all right?" she asked, moving closer. "Just tired suddenly," he slurred, allowing himself to collapse onto the bed. Through half-closed eyes, he observed her satisfied expression as she checked his pulse and breathing. She immediately made a call. "It's working faster than expected. He's already out." "Yes, complete unconsciousness." "No, I followed the dosage exactly." "Fine. Come now instead of waiting." Trent remained motionless as Vivian busied herself, occasionally checking to ensure he remained unresponsive. 20 minutes later, he heard the front door open and multiple sets of footsteps approaching. "Is he out?" came Dominic's voice, followed by the sound of latex gloves snapping. "Completely," Vivian confirmed. "Help me position him in the bathroom." Rough hands grabbed Trent's shoulders and feet. He focused on maintaining the appearance of dead weight as they carried him to the master bathroom and propped him against the bathtub. "The note?" asked a third voice, Uncle Wayne's distinctive baritone. "Already printed and ready for his signature," Dominic replied. "Martha and Preston are creating their alibi at the country club. They'll discover him when they come to check on him later tonight. Let's get his fingerprints on a glass and pill bottle," Wayne directed. "Vivian, where's that sample of his handwriting for the signature?" As they methodically staged his suicide, Trent recorded every word through the miniature device Bryce had supplied, the same type his brother had used to uncover their conspiracy. He endured their dispassionate discussion of his life's value, Vivian's complaints about having to play the grieving wife again, and Dominic's eager plans for the firm once Trent was gone. The police won't look too deeply, Wayne assured them. 2 brothers dying within days, one in an accident, one by suicide. It's tragic, but not suspicious, especially with the embezzlement confession providing motive. When do we get access to the accounts? Vivian asked, the naked greed in her voice stripping away any doubt about her motives. Once the will clears probate, Wayne explained. Preston and Martha inherit everything as his parents, then they'll transfer the agreed-upon percentages. The architecture firm goes to Dominic as the surviving partner. And the life insurance? Dominic pressed. $3 million to Vivian, Wayne confirmed. Clean and untraceable to the rest of us. Eventually, they completed their macabre tableau. Trent slumped against the bathtub, an empty pill bottle nearby, the forged suicide note placed prominently on the counter. They left together, already discussing how to act appropriately shocked when the body was discovered. The moment they departed, Trent sprang into action. He had 3 hours before his parents would arrive to find him. Moving quickly, he gathered the evidence, the drugged whiskey for toxicology testing, the staged suicide note, and most importantly, the full audio recording of the conspiracy. He replaced these items with his own carefully prepared counterparts. A different suicide note with subtle but significant alterations, a whiskey glass with only his normal fingerprints, and a bathroom scene that would pass initial inspection but contain deliberate inconsistencies that would raise questions in a thorough investigation. Then he slipped out through a passage he'd secretly built during renovations, an architect's privilege, and made his way to the prearranged meeting point where Bryce waited with supplies for the next phase. Everything's set, Bryce asked when Trent arrived at the remote cabin they'd purchased off-record years earlier. They performed exactly as expected, Trent confirmed grimly, right down to discussing how to divide the spoils. So what now? We released the evidence to the police. Trent shook his head, his expression hardening. No, that would be too merciful. They'd face legal consequences, perhaps prison, but they'd understand their punishment. They'd have closure. He paced the small cabin, energy radiating from him. I want them to experience what they intended for us. The gradual destruction of everything they value, the constant fear of what comes next, the inability to trust anyone around them. You've always been the planner, Bryce said, recognizing the dangerous brilliance emerging in his twin. What's our first move? We let them believe they've won. Trent explained. My body will be discovered tonight. The police will initially investigate it as a suicide. Our parents, Vivian, Dominic, and Wayne will play their roles as grieving family. And then, Trent's smile was cold. Then Ghost Protocol begins. While they're celebrating their success, we systematically dismantle their plan from the shadows. We've already secured our assets through the trust restructuring you implemented. The money they expect to receive doesn't exist. They'll panic when they realize it's gone, Bryce noted. Exactly, and that's when they'll start turning on each other. Wayne will blame our parents for providing incorrect information. Dominic will suspect Vivian of double-crossing him. Vivian will wonder if our parents kept additional assets hidden. Throughout the night, the twins refined their counter-conspiracy, allocating responsibilities based on their complementary skills. Bryce, now officially dead, would work completely from the shadows, while Trent would implement Phase 2, the false resurrection. The following morning, as expected, headlines announced the tragic suicide of Trent Holloway, just days after his twin brother's fatal accident. The article noted that Trent was survived by his loving wife and parents, who were too devastated to comment. A sidebar mentioned that his business partner, Dominic Russo, would assume control of their architecture firm. Watching the news coverage from their secure location, Trent felt strangely liberated. Legally dead with all my faculties intact. It's an interesting position to operate from. The ultimate freedom, Bryce agreed. No one looks for a dead man. 3 days later, as Trent's funeral proceedings began, the conspirators received their first shock. The family lawyer, summoned for the reading of Trent's will, presented a document dramatically different from what they'd anticipated. This revised will, dated just 2 weeks ago, leaves everything to a blind trust, the bewildered lawyer explained to the stunned gathering. Mr. Holloway's explicit instructions were that no distributions can be made until certain conditions are met. What conditions? Preston demanded, his facade of grief slipping. I'm not at liberty to disclose that information, the lawyer replied. The trustee has sole discretion. Who's the trustee? Martha asked sharply. That information is also confidential. As the conspirators reeled from this setback, more surprises awaited. Dominic discovered that his access to the firm's accounts had been restricted, with major clients receiving notifications that all projects were on hold pending a transition review. Vivian, meanwhile, learned that Trent's life insurance policy had been changed to name a charitable foundation as beneficiary, a foundation investigating traumatic brain injuries in homeless veterans. The first phase of Trent's counterattack was complete. Now, as the conspirators scrambled to understand what had happened to their expected windfall, he prepared to implement the second phase, sowing discord among their ranks. Chapter 5. Phantom Manipulator. From the shadows of legal death, Trent orchestrated a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Using untraceable methods, he began sending each conspirator evidence suggesting another member of their group had betrayed them. Vivian received an anonymous envelope containing bank statements showing Dominic had opened a private account in the Caymans, an account Trent had actually created using information from Dominic's computer. The statements suggested Dominic had been planning to take all the proceeds for himself. Dominic, meanwhile, found documents implying that Uncle Wayne had restructured the expected inheritance to shortchange him significantly. The convincing forgeries, created using Wayne's letterhead and signature style, outlined a secret arrangement between Wayne and the Holloways that excluded both Dominic and Vivian. Wayne received information suggesting Preston and Martha had established a separate agreement with Vivian, planning to frame him as the mastermind if anything went wrong. The fabricated evidence included recorded phone conversations that Trent had carefully edited from actual calls. Preston and Martha Holloway weren't spared either. They received materials indicating Vivian had been working with investigators, preparing to turn state's evidence against them in exchange for immunity. Within a week, the conspiracy began fracturing along the fault lines Trent had identified. Their communications, which he still monitored through Bryce's surveillance equipment, revealed growing suspicion and hostility. I know what you're doing, Vivian hissed at Dominic during a meeting at her home. You thought I wouldn't find out about the Cayman account? What are you talking about? Dominic responded, genuinely confused. And what about your deal with Preston and Martha? Were you planning to throw me to the wolves? At the Holloway residence, similar accusations flew between Wayne and the senior Holloways. After everything I've done for this family, Wayne shouted, waving the fabricated evidence. You plan to make me the scapegoat? That's absurd, Preston retorted. We should be asking why the assets we were promised have vanished. You were in charge of the financial arrangements. The beauty of Trent's strategy lay in its psychological foundation. Each piece of false evidence contained enough truth to be believable and referenced events or conversations that had actually occurred, making denials seem like further deception. While the conspirators turned on each other, Trent implemented the next phase of his plan. Using carefully constructed digital trails, he began triggering investigations into their legitimate business activities. Anonymous tips led tax authorities to examine Wayne's client accounts. Building inspectors suddenly took interest in projects Dominic had managed, discovering numerous code violations that would cost millions to rectify. Meanwhile, Bryce worked on a parallel track, establishing connections with individuals the conspirators had wronged in the past. Former clients of Wayne who had lost money in his investment schemes. Ex-employees Dominic had cheated out of commissions. The contractor Preston had once framed for structural failures in a development project. These aggrieved parties, provided with evidence of their abusers' vulnerabilities, began pursuing long-abandoned legal claims with renewed vigor. By the third week, the conspirators were under siege from multiple directions, fighting among themselves while defending against external threats they didn't understand. Their resources, which had seemed so secure, were being drained by legal fees and emergency measures. Throughout this chaos, Trent remained unseen, monitoring developments through surveillance feeds in a secure apartment he'd established under a false identity. The architectural mind that had once designed harmonious spaces now crafted perfect discord. "They're breaking faster than anticipated," he noted to Bryce during one of their secure communications. Dominic and Vivian had a physical altercation yesterday. She accused him of embezzling from the company accounts. "Wayne isn't faring much better," Bryce replied. "The SEC has frozen his assets pending investigation, and 3 former clients have filed suit claiming he mismanaged their investments. He called our parents demanding money for legal representation, but they claimed they're cash-strapped from unexpected tax audits." Trent allowed himself a cold smile. "Time for the next phase, then. Are you ready to rise from the dead?" Bryce hesitated. "Are you sure it's the right moment? Once we deploy this, there's no going back." "Their alliance is fractured, but not shattered," Trent reasoned. "They still haven't faced their fundamental fear, that their victims might return for retribution. Let's introduce that variable." The following day, as Vivian entered her darkened home after a contentious meeting with her in-laws, she found a single item placed on her kitchen counter: Bryce's distinctive titanium watch, the one supposedly buried with his body. Beside it lay a note in handwriting chillingly similar to Trent's. "Did you really think we wouldn't know?" Across town, Dominic returned to his penthouse to find his computer turned on, displaying surveillance footage of himself and the others planning Trent's suicide. The footage was playing on a continuous loop, with one segment highlighted, Dominic saying, "Once Trent's gone, there'll be no one to challenge us." Preston and Martha Holloway received the most direct message, a delivery containing the blood-stained hiking gear allegedly found on Bryce's body, accompanied by soil samples from Trent's grave. Wayne, perhaps the most vulnerable psychologically, received nothing but a single text message from an unknown number. "Twins see everything. Judgment comes twice." The effect was electric. Within hours, the conspirators' communications revealed full-blown panic. "Someone knows," Vivian screamed during an emergency meeting at the Holloway home. "They have evidence. They're watching us." "It's impossible," Preston insisted, though his shaking hands betrayed his terror. "Both of them are dead. We confirmed it." "Did we?" Wayne challenged. "Did any of us actually see the bodies up close? Really examine them?" "I did," Dominic said defensively. "I helped position Trent. He wasn't breathing. No pulse." "And Bryce?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. The coroner said the face was unidentifiable. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now, Trent prepared to make it bloom into paralyzing fear. Chapter 6. Reflections in Blood. On the 1-month anniversary of his supposed suicide, Trent enacted the most psychologically devastating phase of his plan, the phantom resurrection. Using makeup techniques, subtle facial prosthetics, and a natural advantage of being identical to Bryce, he created a hybrid appearance that would register to observers as both brothers simultaneously, a visual manifestation of their worst fears. His first appearance was precisely calculated for maximum impact. During a board meeting at the architecture firm, where Dominic was attempting to reassure nervous clients about the company's stability, Trent stood silently outside the glass-walled conference room, visible just long enough for Dominic to notice before disappearing. Dominic's reaction, leaping from his chair mid-sentence, face draining of color, created exactly the impression of instability Trent had intended. When security searched the building at Dominic's insistence, they found nothing except a business card from Trent's personal collection placed in Dominic's private bathroom. For Vivian, the haunting took a more intimate form. Returning from a spa weekend she'd taken to escape mounting pressures, she found her bedroom meticulously rearranged to match the configuration from the day she married Trent. On her pillow lay a dried flower from her wedding bouquet that should have been sealed in a memory box in storage. Most disturbing was what she found in her bathroom. Her extensive makeup collection reorganized, with certain items used to write across her mirror. "Behind every face is another." Preston and Martha experienced their visitation during a therapy session they'd reluctantly agreed to attend, struggling to maintain their facade of grieving parents. Through the office window, they both clearly saw a figure with Bryce's stance but Trent's haircut, watching them before stepping into passing traffic and vanishing. Their therapist noted their simultaneous reaction as a shared grief hallucination. But the business card they found in their car afterward, identical to the one Dominic had received, confirmed the experience had been no hallucination. Wayne, already under investigation and increasingly isolated, received the most direct confrontation. Returning to his office after a grueling deposition, he found a man sitting in his chair, back turned, silhouette unmistakable. "Hello, Uncle Wayne," said Trent, using vocal techniques to blend his voice with recordings of Bryce's. "Surprised to see me?" Wayne stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "You're dead. Both of you. Are we?" Trent turned slowly, the careful prosthetics and makeup creating an unsettling hybrid of both twins' features. "Or did you just wish us dead? What do you want?" Wayne gasped, fumbling for heart medication in his desk drawer. "Justice has many forms," Trent replied cryptically. "Some legal, some personal. We thought you deserved to experience both." Before Wayne could respond, Trent activated a small device that cut power to the office. In the momentary darkness, he vanished through a route he'd mapped in advance, leaving behind only a USB drive labeled Confessions that contained recordings of all the conspirators discussing their roles. The psychological effect of these appearances shattered what remained of the conspirators' unity. Dominic, convinced he was being haunted, resigned from the firm and attempted to flee to Mexico, only to be detained at the airport on charges of financial fraud that mysteriously appeared in the system moments before his departure. Vivian barricaded herself in a hotel suite, refusing contact with the others and hiring private security who reported she spent hours staring at mirrors, sometimes conversing with her reflection. Preston and Martha turned on Wayne, accusing him of masterminding a complex fraud against them all. Their allegations, delivered to authorities in a desperate attempt to secure leniency, provided the final piece of Trent's legal strategy. Within 6 weeks of beginning his campaign, Trent had systematically dismantled the conspiracy without directly engaging law enforcement. The conspirators, driven by fear and suspicion, had effectively destroyed themselves and each other. "It's almost too perfect," Bryce commented when they met to evaluate their progress. "They're experiencing exactly what they planned for us, the destruction of everything they value, followed by legal consequences they can't escape." "Almost perfect," Trent agreed, reviewing updates on their targets. "But psychological torture and legal jeopardy aren't enough. They try to take our lives. Now we need to deliver the final judgment, one that can never be traced back to us." Bryce studied his brother's expression, recognizing the implacable resolve that had always differentiated them. While Bryce's anger burned hot and fast, Trent's smoldered beneath the surface, building to an inferno that nothing could extinguish. "What are you planning?" Bryce asked quietly. Trent's smile was terrifying in its calmness. "Something fitting. Something that gives them exactly what they wanted, just not how they wanted it." As they finalized the details of their endgame, Trent reflected on how completely he had shed his former identity. The reasonable, methodical architect was gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. A man who had stared into the abyss of betrayal and emerged transformed. "They wanted us dead and forgotten," he told Bryce. "Instead, they'll be the ones history forgets, while we build new lives from the ashes of their destruction." Chapter 7. Confession and Collapse. The annual charity gala at Seattle's Westbrook Hotel represented everything the conspirators had aspired to: wealth, social standing, and respectability. It was also where Trent chose to orchestrate their final downfall. Despite their deteriorating circumstances, all 5 conspirators attended, each for different reasons. Preston and Martha Holloway needed to maintain appearances among their social circle. Dominic, released on bail pending his fraud trial, desperately sought investors to salvage his reputation. Vivian, emerging briefly from seclusion, came to secure potential allies. Wayne, nearly broken by investigations and stress, had been specifically pressured to attend by anonymous messages threatening further exposure if he refused. None of them knew that Trent had methodically prepared this event as the stage for their collective unmasking. Using his architectural connections, he had gained access to the hotel systems weeks earlier, establishing control over the audiovisual equipment in the main ballroom. The gala proceeded normally through cocktails and dinner, the conspirators avoiding each other while maintaining brittle smiles for the benefit of observers. As the event chairman approached the podium for closing remarks, Trent activated his program remotely. The lights dimmed unexpectedly, and the massive screens flanking the stage, intended for acknowledging donors, came to life with a simple message: the truth about the Holloway twins. What followed was a masterfully edited compilation of the conspirators' own words, snippets from meetings, phone calls, and private conversations, all meticulously captured by Bryce's surveillance. The footage revealed their entire plot in devastating detail: the planned accidents, the financial motivations, the callous disregard for the lives they'd sought to destroy. The assembled elite of Seattle society watched in stunned silence as people they'd respected and admired were exposed as would-be murderers and frauds. Security personnel moved to shut down the presentation, but found the systems locked and unresponsive. For 8 excruciating minutes, the conspiracy unraveled publicly and irrefutably. The final segment showed the staged suicide scene, with Dominic and Vivian callously positioning what they believed was Trent's unconscious body while discussing how to divide his assets. As the screens finally went dark, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Attendees backed away from the conspirators as though physically repelled. Security personnel, responding to urgent directives from hotel management, discreetly surrounded them. Preston collapsed, clutching his chest in what appeared to be a heart attack. Martha stood frozen, her carefully maintained social mask shattered beyond repair. Dominic attempted to flee, but was intercepted by police officers who had been anonymously tipped to attend the event. Vivian, cornered near the service entrance, screamed accusations at Wayne, who sat slumped at his table, staring vacantly at his trembling hands. From a service corridor with a clear view of the ballroom, Trent watched the destruction he'd engineered. The real triumph wasn't just public humiliation. It was the comprehensive legal evidence contained in the presentation. Copies had simultaneously been delivered to law enforcement agencies, regulatory authorities, and select journalists, ensuring that no amount of money or influence could suppress the truth. As sirens wailed outside the hotel, Trent slipped away, his burner phone vibrating with a message from Bryce: justice served. Time for rebirth. The following days saw the complete collapse of the conspirators' world. Dominic, already facing fraud charges, now confronted attempted murder and conspiracy allegations. Vivian, initially claiming victimhood, found her performance undermined by clear video evidence of her active participation. Wayne suffered a debilitating stroke during initial questioning, rendering him physically incapacitated though legally accountable. Preston, surviving his heart attack, and Martha both attempted to shift blame to the others but found themselves isolated and universally condemned. Their legal strategy disintegrated when their own attorneys, disgusted by the evidence, withdrew representation. Public fascination with the case spread nationally, with commentators dubbing it the twin deception. Speculation ran rampant about whether one or both Holloway twins might still be alive, with reported sightings emerging across the country and beyond. Through it all, Trent remained ghost-like, monitoring developments from secure locations while finalizing preparations for his ultimate transition. The legal death of Trent Holloway had provided unexpected freedom, the opportunity to reconstruct himself entirely. "Are you satisfied?" Bryce asked during their last meeting on American soil. "They've lost everything: freedom, reputation, wealth." Trent considered the question seriously. "Not entirely. There's one final judgment they deserve. One that parallels what they planned for us, but with our signature twist. What more could you possibly do to them?" Trent's expression remained impassive. "They wanted us isolated, despairing, and ultimately dead. I I want them to live long lives, contemplating what they've lost and knowing that somewhere we're thriving because of their failure. It was the architect's final design, not a death sentence, but something more psychologically devastating. The knowledge that their victims had not only survived, but would perpetually remain just beyond reach, living well while they rotted in prison cells. As the legal system processed the conspirators, Trent implemented the final phase of his plan, one that would ensure they received precisely calibrated sentences reflecting their culpability. Anonymous tips directed investigators to additional evidence, while strategic leaks to prosecutors highlighted particularly damning aspects of each conspirator's involvement. The result was exactly as he'd engineered. Dominic received 20 years for conspiracy, attempted murder, and financial crimes. Vivian, 15 years with no possibility of parole until serving at least 12. Preston and Martha, 12 years each, ensuring they would likely die in prison given their ages and health. Wayne, deemed mentally unfit for trial after his stroke, was committed to a secure medical facility for the remainder of his life, a prison of physical limitation and mental awareness. With justice secured, Trent prepared for his final disappearance. The man who emerged would bear no resemblance to either Trent or Bryce Holloway, physically, legally, or psychologically. The twins who had been targeted for destruction would instead rise transformed, their betrayers left to contemplate their absolute failure. Chapter 8. Ashes and Rebirth. 6 months after the spectacular public exposure at the charity gala, a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and subtle facial alterations sat at a café terrace in Barcelona, reviewing architectural plans for a revolutionary community center. Known locally as Sebastian Vega, he had quickly established himself as an innovative designer unbound by conventional limitations. Few would connect this confident professional with either of the Holloway twins, presumed dead by most of the world. The surgical alterations, while maintaining his fundamental bone structure, had changed his appearance just enough to pass casual scrutiny. New documentation, secured through carefully cultivated international connections, provided an unassailable identity. Sebastian's phone vibrated with a secure message from his brother, now living as Miguel Vega in Buenos Aires, where he'd established a successful adventure tourism company. The message contained a news article about the conspirators' appeals being unanimously rejected by the Washington State Supreme Court. Final closure, the message concluded. Have you found peace? Sebastian considered the question while watching pedestrians navigate the historic plaza. Had he found peace? The ruthless campaign of destruction he'd orchestrated had succeeded beyond expectation. The conspirators were serving their sentences, financially ruined and socially ostracized. His brother was thriving in his new identity. Their considerable assets had been transferred through untraceable channels, ensuring comfortable futures. Yet something remained unresolved, not regret, but a lingering sense that personal justice, while necessary, had revealed uncomfortable truths about his own nature. Found something more valuable than peace, Sebastian replied. Clarity. The transformation from Trent Holloway to Sebastian Vega represented more than physical alteration or legal reinvention. It acknowledged the emergence of something that had always existed beneath Trent's carefully constructed persona, a capacity for calculated ruthlessness that matched or exceeded anything his enemies had demonstrated. This revelation neither troubled nor pleased him. It simply was a reality to be recognized and integrated rather than denied. The man who had meticulously dismantled 5 lives understood himself now with unprecedented clarity. While establishing his new practice in Barcelona, Sebastian periodically received updates about the conspirators through carefully maintained surveillance channels. Their degradation continued even within the prison system. Dominic, once charismatic and commanding, had become a hollow-eyed shell after multiple assaults by fellow inmates who despised child-targeting criminals. Vivian's beauty, her primary currency, faded rapidly under the harsh conditions of incarceration. Preston suffered a second, more severe heart attack that left him partially paralyzed, dependent on Martha for basic functions. The ultimate irony, The couple that had conspired to eliminate their sons for financial gain now found themselves chained together by medical necessity, mutual contempt growing with each passing day. Wayne, perhaps suffering the cruelest fate, retained enough cognitive function to understand his circumstances but lacked the physical capability to communicate effectively. Reports from the secure medical facility indicated he often stared at televisions when news segments about the case aired, his eyes reflecting complete comprehension of his downfall. Sebastian received these reports without emotion, filing them mentally alongside architectural specifications and design constraints. Simply information to be processed, not celebrated or mourned. His new life developed rhythms entirely separate from his past. The architectural philosophy he now pursued emphasized restoration and transformation rather than the sleek modernism that had characterized Trent Holloway's work. Sebastian Vega specialized in reimagining damaged structures, preserving their essential elements while reconstructing them into something entirely new, an approach that mirrored his personal metamorphosis. On the anniversary of his supposed suicide, Sebastian accepted a commission to redesign a historic building damaged by fire, a project other architects had deemed too challenging. The symmetry pleased him. He had emerged from his own conflagration, transformed rather than destroyed. That evening, he dined at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean. His table companion, a prominent judge with the International Criminal Court, represented another careful step in establishing Sebastian Vega's credentials and connections. "Your reputation grows interesting," the judge commented between courses. A newcomer with no notable history who nevertheless demonstrates exceptional understanding of structural integrity and transformation. "One might wonder about your previous experiences." Sebastian smiled, the expression perfectly calibrated to suggest intrigue without revealing substance. The most valuable experiences often leave no public record. Wouldn't you agree? The conversation shifted to architectural theory, but beneath the professional discourse lay Sebastian's constant awareness of his dual nature, the creator and destroyer existing in perfect balance. The man who had engineered both buildings and ruination with equal precision. Later that night, alone in his minimalist apartment overlooking the Gothic Quarter, Sebastian reviewed preliminary sketches for his latest project when his secure phone indicated an incoming video call from Miguel. His brother's face, also subtly altered but instantly recognizable to Sebastian, appeared on screen. "They're making a documentary about the case," Miguel announced without preamble. "International production, major distribution. They're portraying us as victims who likely didn't survive." "Convenient," Sebastian replied. "Additional insulation for our current identities." Miguel studied his brother's expression. "You seem completely at peace with everything. Even after what we did to them." "We did nothing they hadn't planned for us," Sebastian responded evenly. "We simply executed more effectively." "That's technically true, but—" Miguel hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder if we went too far. Not with them. They deserved everything. But with ourselves, what we became in the process." Sebastian considered this thoughtfully. "We became what we always were, just without illusions." The capacity for calculated destruction existed in both of us. They merely catalyzed its emergence. "And that doesn't disturb you? Should understanding one's self be disturbing?" Sebastian countered. "I see it as clarity. They sought to eliminate us because they underestimated what we were capable of. Their fundamental miscalculation." The brothers discussed practical matters before ending the call, but Miguel's question lingered in Sebastian's mind. Had they gone too far? Had the architect of vengeance overbuilt his structure? The question itself revealed the primary difference between the twins. Bryce, now Miguel, still measured himself against external moral frameworks, seeking validation or condemnation from abstract principles. Trent, now Sebastian, recognized only effectiveness and intention as meaningful metrics. What they had done was exactly what the situation demanded. No more, no less. The precision of the response pleased the architect in him. The conspirators had received penalties proportional to their actions, delivered through mechanisms they themselves had initiated. As Sebastian returned to his designs, he He reflected that his greatest creation wasn't any building or destruction plot. It was himself, redesigned and reconstructed from the foundation up. The ruthless clarity that had emerged during his campaign of vengeance now served different ends, but remained fundamentally unchanged, a willingness to see systems as they truly operated and manipulate them accordingly. The conspirators had sought to destroy him using society's blind spots and procedural vulnerabilities. He had turned those same mechanisms against them, then stepped beyond the entire system to reinvent himself completely. Sebastian Vega represented not just survival, but transcendence, the ultimate architectural achievement of Trent Holloway's final design. Chapter 9. Echoes and Resolution. 5 years after assuming his new identity, Sebastian Vega received an unexpected message through one of the secure channels he maintained for monitoring the conspirators. Dominic Russo, broken by years of imprisonment and declining health, had requested a meeting with the prosecutor who had handled the case. Intrigued, Sebastian accessed the conversation recording through carefully placed connections in the judicial system. Dominic, barely recognizable from his formerly polished appearance, sat hunched across from the prosecutor, his prison pallor accentuated by premature aging. "I need to confess something that wasn't in the original case," Dominic began, his voice hoarse. "Something about the Holloway twins." The prosecutor leaned forward. "We've established your role in the conspiracy quite thoroughly, Mr. Russo. What could you possibly add now?" "The truth about Bryce Holloway's body," Dominic replied. "It wasn't him in that casket. We paid a morgue attendant to provide a John Doe with similar build. The face was deliberately damaged post-mortem to prevent identification." Sebastian watched impassively as Dominic detailed the body-switching operation, confirming what he already knew, but raising a more interesting question. Why confess this particular aspect now? "So you're admitting to additional charges of corpse desecration and obstruction of justice," the prosecutor noted. "Why come forward with this after 5 years?" Dominic's expression reflected something beyond fear or remorse, a haunted quality that transcended physical confinement. "Because they're still out there," he whispered. "Both of them, watching us, punishing us." "Mr. Russo, both Holloway twins were declared legally dead years ago. There's been no evidence." "I've seen them," Dominic interrupted frantically. "Not directly, but their influence. The guard who specifically requested transfer to my cell block has Trent's exact posture and mannerisms. The new prison psychologist who interviews me monthly uses Bryce's distinctive phrases. They're toying with us, making sure we never forget, never feel safe." The prosecutor sighed, clearly interpreting this as prison-induced paranoia. "I'll make note of your additional confession, but I suggest you discuss these perceptions with your mental health provider." What the prosecutor dismissed as delusion, Sebastian recognized as the final success of his psychological warfare. He had indeed arranged for certain prison personnel to subtly mimic mannerisms and expressions from both twins, not through any direct connection, but through intermediaries who simply paid specific guards and administrators to incorporate certain behaviors around the conspirators. The haunting continued precisely as designed, invisible to anyone except the targets themselves. Each conspirator experienced personalized torments. Preston received regular letters containing quotes from favorite books he'd read to his sons, written in handwriting that mimicked his own. Martha's cell periodically contained objects from the twins' childhood, impossible to source within prison walls. Vivian found her personal items rearranged in patterns only she would recognize as significant. None could prove these occurrences to authorities, creating exactly the doubt about their own sanity that Sebastian had intended. The physical imprisonment was merely the container. The real punishment was psychological, perpetual uncertainty about what was real and what was manipulation. Watching Dominic's desperate confession, Sebastian felt neither satisfaction nor remorse, only the clean certainty of a well-executed design reaching its intended function. The man who had helped position his unconscious body for staged suicide now lived in perpetual fear of ghosts who were simultaneously dead and everywhere. Later that week, Sebastian flew to Buenos Aires for one of his occasional reunions with Miguel. His brother had built a successful life, incorporating his natural love for adventure, leading exclusive wilderness expeditions for wealthy clients seeking authentic experiences. Unlike Sebastian, who maintained studious surveillance of their former enemies, Miguel had largely disconnected from their past. "You're still monitoring them," Miguel noted as they shared dinner at his hillside home overlooking the city. "After all this time, why?" Sebastian considered the question while savoring an excellent Malbec. Architectural integrity requires monitoring structural performance over time. It's professional thoroughness, not emotional investment. Miguel laughed, the sound carrying the warmth that distinguished him from his brother even before their transformations. "You've turned ruthlessness into a philosophy. Sometimes I barely recognize the Trent I grew up with." "That person no longer exists," Sebastian replied simply. "Just as Bryce doesn't. We're who we chose to become instead of who they tried to make us." "And who exactly is Sebastian Vega?" Miguel challenged gently. "The man who builds remarkable structures by day and orchestrates psychological torture by night." Sebastian didn't bristle at the characterization. "Someone who understands that justice and legality aren't synonymous. The system they attempted to use against us is fundamentally limited, designed to process violations according to standardized metrics rather than truly address harm." "So you've appointed yourself judge and executioner." "Observer," Sebastian corrected. "I simply ensure they experience the consequences they design for others. The psychological framework they constructed for our destruction now contains them instead." Miguel studied his brother, recognition and concern mingling in his expression. "Have you considered that this ongoing involvement connects you to them permanently? That true freedom might mean letting go entirely." The question lingered between them, uncharacteristically penetrating Sebastian's carefully maintained equilibrium. Had his meticulous surveillance become its own form of prison? Did his continued orchestration of their suffering represent control or subconscious attachment? "Perhaps," Sebastian acknowledged, surprising both himself and Miguel with the concession. "But completion requires verification. I need certainty that the structure stands independently before I disconnect." Later that night, unable to sleep, Sebastian stood on Miguel's terrace contemplating the distant lights of Buenos Aires. His brother's question had uncovered something he'd avoided examining: the possibility that his continued involvement with the conspirators represented not justice, but inability to transcend the defining trauma of his previous identity. True architectural mastery involved not just creation, but eventual separation, the moment when the designer steps away, allowing the structure to exist independently. Had he reached that point with his elaborate punishment system, or was he maintaining unnecessary connections? The question followed Sebastian back to Barcelona, infiltrating his thoughts during design sessions and client meetings. For the first time since implementing his vengeance, he found himself distracted by philosophical rather than practical considerations. The resolution came unexpectedly, during a meeting with potential clients seeking to transform an abandoned prison into a community art center. As Sebastian toured the facility, observing the psychological impact of the space, the intentional disorientation, the subtle reinforcement of powerlessness through architectural cues, he recognized the parallel to his own creation. He had constructed a perfect prison for the conspirators, one that existed primarily in their minds, but was no less confining for its intangibility. The question wasn't whether it functioned as designed, but whether its continued operation served any purpose beyond habit. That evening, Sebastian made a decision that surprised even himself. He systematically terminated the surveillance systems and influence networks he'd maintained for years, not from mercy or regret, but from the clean certainty of an architect who recognizes when a structure is complete. The conspirators would continue experiencing their personalized haunting through established patterns and their own psychological conditioning, but without his active involvement. The machine would run independently until it wound down naturally or they ceased to exist, whichever came first. His final act was reviewing a comprehensive file he'd maintained on each conspirator's destruction. Vivian, once obsessed with physical appearance, now showed signs of accelerated aging from stress and prison conditions. Dominic, whose confidence had been his defining characteristic, now jumped at shadows and trusted no one. Preston and Martha, separated into different facilities after Preston's medical emergency, communicated through increasingly bitter letters that revealed their mutual contempt. Wayne, perhaps experiencing the most fitting consequence, had regained speech capability but lost short-term memory function. He repeatedly experienced the shock of learning about his circumstances as if for the first time, trapped in an endless loop of realization and horror. Sebastian closed the files permanently, transferring them to a secure server that would automatically delete all contents after a predetermined period. The architect of vengeance had completed his masterwork, a self-sustaining system of consequences that required no further input. 1 year later, Sebastian stood at the opening ceremony for his most acclaimed project, the transformation of a damaged historical structure into a breathtaking community space that honored its original elements while creating something entirely new. As journalists praised his revolutionary approach to architectural redemption, Sebastian recognized the unintentional accuracy of their assessment. He had indeed perfected the art of redemption, not through forgiveness or restoration, but through complete transformation. The damaged structure of his former identity had been neither discarded nor simply repaired, but fundamentally reimagined into something more powerful and true. Miguel joined him for the celebration, their subtle physical alterations allowing them to appear together without raising connections to the Holloway twins. As they shared a private moment away from the crowds, Miguel asked the question that had lingered between them. "Have you finally let them go?" Sebastian nodded, the motion conveying finality. "The design is complete. Further involvement would be redundant." "And what comes next for the architect of perfect vengeance?" Miguel asked, only half joking. Sebastian surveyed the celebration around them, acknowledging the irony that his greatest professional triumph had emerged from the same capacity for transformative vision that had enabled his elaborate retribution. "Creation without limitation," he replied simply. The twins died, so Sebastian could build without constraints of history or identity. That seems like adequate compensation for attempted murder. As the brothers shared a rare moment of genuine laughter, Sebastian recognized that his journey from Trent Holloway to Sebastian Vega represented not just survival or revenge, but evolution. The emergence of something that incorporated elements of his past while transcending its limitations entirely. The conspirators remained in their various prisons, both physical and psychological, condemned by their own actions rather than external judgment. Sebastian had simply ensured the punishment perfectly reflected the crime. Attempted murder of identity had resulted in complete destruction of their own. Justice, Sebastian concluded, wasn't about restoration or even balance. It was about transformation, the alchemical process that converted betrayal and destruction into the foundation for something entirely new. The twins hadn't survived. They had transcended, leaving behind both their would-be murderers and their former selves. In this final victory, Sebastian found something unexpected, not forgiveness or closure, but freedom from the very need for either. The architect had created his masterpiece, and now stood apart from it, ready to build anew. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Marshall Gilmore had always believed in building things from the ground up. At 34, he transformed himself from a kid who grew up in Detroit's roughest neighborhood into a senior software architect with a reputation for solving impossible problems. His calloused hands, remnants of teenage summers working construction with his grandfather, now crafted elegant code that powered Fortune 500 companies. The downtown Chicago apartment he shared with his wife Ashley reflected his journey. Clean lines, minimal furniture, but every piece carefully chosen and built to last. Just like everything else in his life, Marshall approached it with methodical precision. "You're obsessing again," Ashley said from the kitchen island, not looking up from her tablet. At 29, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads in restaurants. Blonde hair, always perfectly styled, clothes that seemed to arrange themselves flatteringly around her petite frame. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a boutique firm, though Marshall had noticed she spent more time networking at industry events than at her desk. "I'm preparing," Marshall replied, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Today was different. Today was North Technologies. For 3 years, Marshall had watched Grant North build his cybersecurity company from startup to industry leader. North Technologies didn't just offer jobs, they offered legacies. Their autonomous security systems protected critical infrastructure across the globe. Working there wasn't about a paycheck. It was about being part of something that mattered. "It's just another interview, Marsh," Ashley said, finally glancing up with those green eyes that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's party 5 years ago. "Don't make it bigger than it is." Marshall studied her reflection in the mirror. They'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and lately, he'd been noticing things. The way she deflected whenever he shared his ambitions. How she seemed more interested in her phone than his stories about breakthrough projects. The growing distance that felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon. "This isn't just another interview, Ash. Grant North personally requested to meet with me. Do you know what that means?" She shrugged, returning to her tablet. Rich guys with God complexes love finding new people to worship them. The comment stung because it revealed how little she understood him. Marshall had never worshipped anyone. Respect was earned through competence and integrity, 2 qualities he'd recognized immediately in Grant North's public interviews and company culture. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from his best friend and former college roommate, Craig Garrison. "Today's the day, brother. You've got this. North would be an idiot not to hire you." Craig understood. As a project manager at a competing firm, he knew what North Technologies represented in their industry. He'd been the one to encourage Marshall to apply when the position first opened, spending hours helping him prepare. "I should get going," Marshall said, grabbing his portfolio from the coffee table. 3 years of his best work, organized and presented with the same meticulous attention to detail that had earned him recognition at his current job. Ashley looked up one final time. "What if you don't get it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marshall had asked himself the same thing, but hearing it from his wife felt different, like she expected him to fail. "Then I'll figure out the next step," he said simply. "But I'm not planning to fail." As he walked to the elevator, Marshall reflected on the path that brought him here. His grandfather, Emmanuel Gilmore, had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Emmanuel had been a carpenter, a man who measured success in straight lines and solid foundations. "Build it right the first time, Marshall," he used to say. "Shortcuts are just long paths to failure." Marshall had applied that philosophy to everything: his education, his career, his marriage. He'd worked 2 jobs to pay for computer science school, spent countless nights learning new programming languages, built his reputation one successful project at a time. The drive to North Technologies headquarters gave him time to center himself. This interview wasn't about desperation or ambition for its own sake. It was about finding a place where his skills could make a real difference, where he could build something lasting. As Marshall pulled into the visitor parking space, he didn't notice the black sedan that had been following him since his apartment building. Inside, Ashley Gilmore sat behind the wheel, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the steering wheel as she watched her husband disappear into the glass building that represented everything she'd been working to prevent. Chapter 2: Hidden Motives. Ashley Gilmore waited in her car for 30 minutes after Marshall entered the North Technologies building before making her call. "Carmen, it's me," she said when the familiar voice answered. He just went in. Carmen Horton had been Ashley's sorority sister at Northwestern, and now worked as a private investigator specializing in corporate background checks. Their friendship had always been transactional, Carmen provided information. Ashley provided access to social circles that valued her appearance and charm over substance. You sure about this? Carmen asked. Marshall's a good guy. Maybe the best thing that ever happened to you. Ashley stared at the glass building where her husband was probably impressing another room full of men with his earnest competence. That's exactly the problem. She'd met Marshall at a party she'd attended with her then-boyfriend, a med school student whose family owned half of Lake Forest. Marshall had been Craig's plus one, quiet and intense in the corner, discussing something technical with animated gestures. He wasn't her type, too serious, too working class, too genuine. But her med school boyfriend had cheated on her that same week, and Marshall had been there with his steady presence and complete devotion. He pursued her with the same methodical determination he applied to everything else, and she found herself swept along by the novelty of being someone's entire world. The problem was that Marshall's world kept expanding. Every success at work, every recognition, every opportunity like North Technologies, they all pulled him further from the life Ashley had envisioned for them. He's going to get this job, Ashley said into the phone. Grant North doesn't meet with people unless he's already decided. So let him get it. North Technologies pays well. You could quit that marketing job you hate. Ashley closed her eyes. Carmen didn't understand. Nobody understood. If Marshall takes this job, he'll disappear completely. You know what these tech guys are like when they find their calling. He already works 12-hour days on regular projects. Imagine what he'd do at his dream company. You married him knowing who he was, Ash. I married him thinking he'd grow out of it. The admission felt ugly in the morning sunlight. I thought he'd realize there was more to life than code and security protocols, that he'd want to travel, to live a little, to put our relationship first for once. Instead, Marshall had only grown more passionate about his work. Their conversations increasingly revolved around his projects, his goals, his 5-year plans that never seemed to include Ashley's dreams of a different life. What exactly did you send them? Carmen asked. Ashley reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope identical to the one she'd overnight to Grant North's office 3 days ago. Inside were photos from Marshall's college years, pictures of him at parties, drunk and laughing with friends, screenshots of old social media posts with crude jokes, a fabricated report suggesting he'd been involved in academic dishonesty. None of it was damning by itself, but together, the documents painted a picture of someone unreliable, immature, potentially dishonest. Carmen had helped her obtain Marshall's college records through questionable means, and Ashley had done the rest with photo manipulation software and carefully crafted narratives. It's not even that bad, Ashley said, more to convince herself than Carmen. It's just college stuff. Everyone has embarrassing photos. Everyone doesn't send their spouses embarrassing photos to potential employers. He'll find another job, maybe something local, something with better work-life balance. This could actually be good for our marriage. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. You know this is sabotage, right? Like, actual sabotage of your husband's career. Ashley ended the call without responding. She knew exactly what it was. Through the building's glass facade, she could see Marshall in the lobby, checking his watch and straightening his tie. He looked confident, prepared, optimistic. Everything she'd fallen for and everything she now resented. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How did Marshall's interview go? Your father and I are so excited for you both. Ashley's parents had loved Marshall from day one. Her father, a corporate lawyer who typically intimidated Ashley's boyfriends, had immediately respected Marshall's work ethic and integrity. Her mother had been charmed by his old-fashioned courtesy and obvious devotion to Ashley. They saw him as the stable, successful husband their daughter deserved. They didn't see what Ashley saw, a man so consumed by his professional identity that he'd already forgotten how to be a husband. As Ashley drove home, she tried to imagine the conversation Marshall would have with Grant North, the technical discussions that would go over her head, the shared vision for cybersecurity innovation that would light up Marshall's eyes the way she hadn't in months. She tried to feel guilty about the envelope now sitting in North's office, but mostly she felt relieved. For the first time in months, she was taking control of her own life instead of watching it disappear into her husband's ambitions. Ashley didn't know that Marshall had spent the previous evening writing her a letter he'd planned to give her after the interview. A letter explaining how the job at North Technologies would finally provide the security and stability he'd always wanted to build for them. How it would be the foundation for the family they'd talked about starting, the house they wanted to buy, the future they'd dreamed of together. The letter was in his portfolio, waiting for a celebration that would never come. Chapter 3. The Betrayal Unveiled. The North Technologies conference room overlooked Chicago's skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city Marshall had conquered through pure determination. Grant North, a silver-haired man in his 50s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sat across from him with Marshall's portfolio open between them. For 45 minutes, the interview had been everything Marshall had hoped. They discussed Marshall's innovative approach to penetration testing, his development of autonomous threat detection systems, his vision for the future of cybersecurity. Grant's questions were probing but appreciative, the kind of technical deep dive that energized Marshall rather than intimidated him. "Your work on the Henderson Bank project is remarkable," Grant said, reviewing Marshall's case studies. "You identified vulnerabilities that 3 separate security firms missed. Pattern recognition combined with social engineering awareness," Marshall replied. "Most hackers aren't just exploiting technical weaknesses, they're exploiting human psychology. Exactly the kind of thinking we need here." Grant closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Marshall thought he saw something change in the older man's expression, a shadow crossing his face. "Marshall, I have to be honest with you. This interview has gone better than I expected." Marshall felt his heart rate increase. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. Which makes what I have to discuss next all the more difficult." Grant opened a different folder, one Marshall hadn't noticed before. Inside were photographs, college photos Marshall recognized from his Facebook account years ago, screenshots of old posts, documents that looked official but felt wrong in ways Marshall couldn't immediately identify. "3 days ago, I received a package of materials regarding your background," Grant continued, his voice careful and professional. "I want to give you an opportunity to address these concerns directly." Marshall stared at the photos, his mind racing. There was nothing scandalous in his past, nothing that should disqualify him from any position. Yet seeing his college memories arranged like evidence in a criminal case made his stomach turn. "I don't understand," Marshall said, picking up one of the photos. It showed him at a party during senior year, clearly drunk, making an exaggerated face at the camera. Harmless college stupidity, but presented without context, it looked different. "Where did you get these?" "They were submitted anonymously, along with this report." Grant handed him a typed document that detailed alleged academic dishonesty, unprofessional behavior, and character concerns. Marshall's name was on it, but he'd never seen it before in his life. "This isn't real," Marshall said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I mean, the photos are real, but this report, I've never seen this document. My academic record is clean. You can verify everything with Northwestern." Grant nodded slowly. "I already have. Your official transcripts show no academic violations. Your professors remember you as one of their most dedicated students." "Then why?" "Because someone wanted to make sure you didn't get this job." Grant's expression was grim. "Marshall, I've been in business for 20 years. I can recognize a smear campaign when I see one. The question is, who would go to this much trouble to sabotage your career?" Marshall's mind immediately went to competitors at his current job, former colleagues who might resent his success, industry rivals. The idea that someone would deliberately fabricate evidence to destroy his opportunities was staggering, but not impossible in the cutthroat world of corporate cybersecurity. "I honestly don't know," Marshall said, "but I can prove that document is fabricated. I can provide character references, work samples, anything you need." Grant was quiet for a long moment, studying Marshall's face. "Here's what I see," he said finally. "Either you're an excellent liar, or someone who cares about your personal life has decided to torpedo your professional one. Based on this interview, I'm inclined to believe the latter." "What do you mean?" "The envelope was postmarked locally. Whoever sent this has access to your personal photos and enough information about your background to create convincing forgeries. This wasn't done by a business competitor, Marshall. This was done by someone close to you." The realization hit Marshall like a physical blow. The photos were from his private social media accounts. The personal details in the forged report were things only family or close friends would know. The timing, right before the most important interview of his career. "I need to make some calls," Marshall said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I understand. Grant closed the folder and looked directly at Marshall. For what it's worth, I believe you. Your work speaks for itself, and this kind of sabotage tells me more about the person who sent it than about you. But I can't ignore it entirely. I need you to find out who did this and why. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Take a week. Get to the bottom of this situation. If you can prove what I suspect, that someone in your personal life is actively sabotaging your career, then we'll move forward with an offer. But I won't hire someone whose family situation could compromise their professional effectiveness. Marshall stood and shook Grant's hand, his mind already racing through possibilities. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this. Don't thank me yet. Proving betrayal by someone you trust, that's going to hurt more than losing any job. As Marshall walked to the elevator, Grant's words echoed in his mind. Someone close to him had done this. Someone who knew his dreams, his ambitions, his schedule. Someone who had access to his personal life and detailed knowledge of this interview. The elevator doors closed, and Marshall caught his reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. The careful control he'd maintained his entire adult life was cracking, and underneath was something harder, more dangerous than he'd ever acknowledged. By the time he reached the parking garage, Marshall had made a decision. He was going to find out who had betrayed him, and he was going to make sure they never had the opportunity to do it again. His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. Marshall stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without responding. The woman who claimed to love him was asking about the interview she might have just destroyed. It was time to find out exactly who Ashley Gilmore really was. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. Marshall sat in his car in the North Technologies parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at his phone. Ashley's text glowed on the screen like an accusation. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. The timing was too perfect. The intimacy of the sabotage too complete. But Marshall's analytical mind demanded evidence before accusation. He'd built his career on facts, not assumptions. He drove to a coffee shop near his office instead of going home. The familiar environment of caffeine and keyboard clicks helped him think clearly. Marshall opened his laptop and began methodically examining the possibilities. First, he called his college roommate Craig. How'd it go, brother? Craig's voice was excited, expectant. Someone sent Grant North a file of compromising photos and fake documents to sabotage the interview, Marshall said without preamble. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. What? Who would do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The photos were from my private Facebook account, mostly college stuff. Did you ever save any of those old party pictures? Hell no. I barely remember half those parties, let alone save photos from them. Marsh, this is insane. Who has access to your social media? Marshall mentally cataloged the list. His wife, his mother-in-law, who was Facebook obsessed, a handful of college friends. His current colleagues weren't connected to his personal accounts. He kept strict boundaries between professional and private online presence. Craig, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot, has Ashley ever said anything to you about my work? About me spending too much time on projects, or anything like that? Another pause. Marsh, you know I love Ashley, but yeah? Last month at Jake's birthday party, she mentioned that you've been obsessing over North Technologies. She said something about you caring more about Grant North's approval than your marriage. Marshall felt the pieces clicking into place, each revelation adding weight to a conclusion he didn't want to reach. What exactly did she say? She was drinking, probably didn't mean anything by it. But she said you'd been talking about North Technologies for months, that she felt like she was competing with your career for attention. She said, shit, I probably shouldn't repeat this. Tell me. She said she wished you cared half as much about your marriage as you did about impressing some CEO you'd never met. Marshall closed his laptop. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. Access to photos, intimate knowledge of his ambitions, recent complaints about his priorities. But Ashley wasn't sophisticated enough to forge official documents. She would have needed help. His phone rang. Ashley. Hey you, she said, her voice bright with artificial cheer. You never answered my text. How did it go? It was interesting, Marshall replied carefully. Grant North is everything I thought he'd be. That's great. So you got the job. Marshall noticed she asked about the outcome, not about his experience or what they'd discussed. He needs to review a few things. I should know by next week. Oh, her disappointment sounded genuine, which was almost worse. Well, I'm sure it'll work out. You want to go out to dinner tonight? Celebrate the interview at least. Actually, I need to work late tonight. Finishing up a project. Of course you do. The mask slipped for just a moment, irritation bleeding through her cheerful tone. Marsh, when was the last time we had dinner together? Just us. No work talk, no phone calls. We had dinner 2 nights ago. You had dinner while answering emails and explaining server architecture to me like I was your client instead of your wife. Marshall felt a familiar frustration. He'd been excited about a breakthrough on a particularly challenging security problem, and he'd wanted to share it with the person closest to him. Ashley had listened with the glazed expression she wore whenever he discussed work, then changed the subject to weekend plans. I'll be home by 9, he said. We can talk then. After ending the call, Marshall made another decision. He drove to Carmen Horton's office. He'd met Carmen several times at social gatherings with Ashley. She was a private investigator who specialized in corporate background checks, which made her exactly the kind of person who could fabricate convincing official documents. More importantly, she and Ashley had maintained their sorority friendship with the kind of intensity that suggested shared secrets. Carmen's office was in a downtown building that had seen better decades. Her name was painted on frosted glass in letters that might have been stylish in 1985. Marshall knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Marshall Gilmore, Carmen said, looking up from her desk without surprise. I was wondering when you'd show up. Were you? Marshall closed the door behind him and took the chair across from her desk. And why's that? Carmen was the kind of woman who cultivated toughness like armor, leather jacket, dark makeup, expression that suggested she'd seen everything humanity had to offer and wasn't impressed. But Marshall caught something in her eyes that looked like guilt. Your wife called me this morning, Carmen said. Said you had a rough interview. Asked if I knew anyone who could help with character references. Interesting timing. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Carmen the photos Grant North had shared. Someone sent these to North Technologies 3 days ago, along with fabricated academic records suggesting I was dishonest and unreliable. Carmen studied the images without touching the phone. College photos. Looks like typical Friday night stupidity. The kind of photos someone could use to make me look unprofessional if they presented them without context. I suppose. Carmen, I need to ask you directly. Did you help someone sabotage my interview? She met his gaze steadily. No. Did Ashley ask you to help sabotage my interview? The pause was fractional, but Marshall caught it. No. Then why do you look guilty? Carmen leaned back in her chair, her tough facade cracking slightly. Because I told her she was making a mistake. What mistake? Marshall, I've known Ashley since college. She's my friend, but she's used to getting what she wants, and she doesn't always think through the consequences. What did she want? For you to not get this job. She came to me last month asking about corporate background checks, how they work, what kinds of things disqualify candidates. She was worried that North Technologies would consume your life, that you'd disappear into your work completely. Marshall felt his world shifting, relationships he'd trusted revealing themselves as carefully constructed lies. And you helped her? I told her it was insane, that she should talk to you about her concerns instead of sabotaging your career. I told her she was going to destroy her marriage. But you didn't stop her. Carmen's expression hardened. I'm not Ashley's keeper, and I'm not yours either. But if you're here looking for someone to confirm that your wife betrayed you, then yeah, she did. And if you're looking for advice, here it is. Decide what you want to do about it before you go home tonight, because Ashley's going to lie to your face, and you're going to have to decide whether you can live with that. Marshall stood to leave, then turned back. One more question. How would she have created fake academic records convincing enough to fool a CEO? Carmen's smile was bitter. She wouldn't have, but she knows someone who would. Who? Her ex-boyfriend from Northwestern. Felipe Burke. He works in academic administration now, has access to official letterhead, student records, all kinds of resources someone could use to create convincing forgeries. Marshall memorized the name. Felipe Burke. Another piece of the puzzle, another person in Ashley's life who'd been willing to betray a stranger to help her get what she wanted. As he walked back to his car, Marshall realized that discovering Ashley's betrayal wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Because now he knew exactly who his wife was, and she had no idea that he knew. That gave him all the advantage he needed. Chapter 5. The deeper truth. Marshall spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough investigation of his life, not of security vulnerabilities or system weaknesses, but of the woman he'd married. What he discovered made the North Technologies' sabotage look like a minor character flaw. He started with Felipe Burke. Northwestern's academic administration office was housed in a Gothic revival building that made Marshall feel like he was infiltrating a medieval fortress. He'd called ahead, claiming to be verifying his own academic records for a security clearance update, a lie, but one that got him an appointment with Felipe without raising suspicions. Felipe Burke was exactly what Marshall had expected: soft around the middle, prematurely thinning hair, the kind of man who'd peaked in college and spent his 30s reliving those glory days. His office was cluttered with Northwestern memorabilia and photos from what appeared to be the same fraternity parties where Marshall's compromising photos had been taken. Marshall Gilmore, Felipe said, consulting his computer screen. Class of 2013, Computer Science, graduated summa cum laude. Very impressive record. Thank you. I just need official copies of my transcripts for a background check. Of course. Though I have to say, your name sounds familiar. Didn't you marry Ashley Hahn? She was a year behind us. Kappa Sigma sorority? Marshall's blood chilled. Felipe wasn't just willing to help Ashley. He was personally invested. You know Ashley? We dated for a while junior and senior year. Great girl. Actually, she called me last week asking about transcript verification processes. Said you were applying for some big job and wanted to make sure everything looked perfect. The lies were getting more elaborate. Ashley hadn't just asked for help. She'd created an entire narrative to manipulate Felipe into providing assistance. What kind of assistance did she need? Marshall asked carefully. Felipe's expression shifted slightly, the first sign that he realized he might have said too much. Just general information. How the verification process works. What kinds of red flags employers look for. Nothing specific. Felipe, I need you to be honest with me. Did Ashley ask you to create false documents using Northwestern's letterhead? I don't know what you're talking about. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Felipe the fabricated academic misconduct report that Grant North had received. This document claims to be from Northwestern's Academic Integrity Office. It's completely false. I was never investigated for academic dishonesty. But someone with access to official letterhead and intimate knowledge of university procedures created it. Felipe studied the document, his face growing pale. Marshall, Ashley said. What did Ashley say? She said you were worried about some college stuff coming up in a background check, that you wanted to get ahead of it by explaining context. She asked me to help draft a letter explaining that certain incidents had been investigated and resolved. What incidents? I never had any incidents. The party photos, the social media posts. Ashley said you were concerned that a potential employer might misinterpret them, and you wanted an official explanation that you'd been a good student despite normal college behavior. Marshall felt sick. Ashley had manipulated Felipe by telling him a version of the truth twisted just enough to make him complicit. She'd made him believe he was helping Marshall while actually destroying his career prospects. Felipe, this document doesn't explain away college behavior. It creates the impression that I was investigated for serious academic violations. It's designed to make any employer question my integrity. The blood drained from Felipe's face as he understood what he'd been manipulated into doing. Oh God, Ashley said. She said you just wanted something official looking to include with your application materials, to get ahead of any concerns about the photos. She lied to you, just like she lied to me. Felipe sat heavily in his chair, running his hands through his thinning hair. Marshall, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. Ashley can be very convincing when she wants something. How convincing? Felipe looked up sharply, recognizing something dangerous in Marshall's tone. What do you mean? How far back does this go? How long has Ashley been manipulating people to get what she wants? Felipe was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. She cheated on me. Senior year, right before graduation. I found out she'd been seeing someone else for months, some medical student from a wealthy family. When I confronted her, she convinced me that it was my fault for not being ambitious enough, for not giving her the kind of life she deserved. But you still helped her sabotage my career. She called in tears, said you were obsessed with work, that this job would destroy your marriage. She made it sound like she was trying to save your relationship. Marshall stood to leave, his mind already processing this new information. Ashley's betrayal wasn't impulsive, it was part of a pattern. She'd been manipulating the people around her for years, using their emotions and loyalties as weapons to get what she wanted. Felipe, I need you to write down exactly what Ashley asked you to do, word for word. Include dates and times. Can you do that? Are you going to report me? Not if you help me fix this. That evening, Marshall returned home to find Ashley cooking dinner, a rare occurrence that immediately raised his suspicions. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, her hair styled the way he'd once told her he loved. Hey you, she said, kissing him on the cheek with practiced affection. I made your favorite. Chicken marsala, a dish she'd only prepared twice in their 3-year marriage, both times when she wanted something. Marshall sat at the table and watched her performance, noting the calculated nature of every gesture. How was your day, he asked. Good. Busy. Carmen called. She said you stopped by her office? I didn't even know you knew where she worked. Ashley's voice was light, conversational, but Marshall caught the tension underneath. She was fishing for information, trying to understand what he knew. I wanted to get her perspective on background checks, Marshall said, since someone's been investigating me. Oh right, that thing Grant North mentioned. Any idea who might have sent those documents? Marshall studied his wife's face as she asked the question. Her expression was perfectly concerned, appropriately curious. If he hadn't already known the truth, he would have believed her completely. Actually, yes. I found out exactly who sent them. Ashley went very still, though she tried to hide it by taking a sip of wine. Really? Who would do something like that? My wife. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Ashley's carefully constructed mask didn't slip. She was too good at this game for such an obvious tell. Instead, she laughed, the sound bright and incredulous. Marshall, that's crazy. Why would I sabotage your career? I want you to succeed. Do you? Because Felipe Burke told me exactly how you convinced him to create fake academic records. And Carmen confirmed that you've been planning this for weeks. Ashley set down her wine glass with steady hands, but Marshall caught the slight tremor in her fingers. I don't know what they told you, but they told me the truth. The question is, what are you going to tell me? For the first time in their marriage, Marshall saw Ashley's mask slip completely. The concerned wife, the supportive partner, the woman who claimed to love him. All of it fell away, revealing someone cold and calculating underneath. Fine, she said, her voice losing all warmth. You want the truth? I did it. I sent those documents to Grant North because I knew that job would be the end of us. So you decided to destroy my career instead. I decided to save our marriage. Marshall felt something break inside him, not his heart, but something deeper. The fundamental trust that had allowed him to build a life with another person. Our marriage was never in danger, Ashley. But it is now. Ashley stood up from the table, her posture shifting into something more aggressive. You have no idea what it's like being married to someone who cares more about their work than their spouse. You live for those projects, Marshall. You come alive when you talk about security protocols and threat assessments, but you look bored when I try to talk about my day. Because your day consists of shopping and gossip and avoiding any real responsibility. There it is. Ashley's smile was sharp, triumphant. Finally, some honesty. You think I'm shallow. You think my work doesn't matter. You think I'm just some accessory to your perfect professional life. I think you're someone who destroys other people's dreams when they interfere with what you want. And I think you're someone who forgot he had a wife the moment you decided to become the next great cybersecurity genius. Marshall looked at the woman he'd married. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Beautiful, charming, skilled at reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted. But underneath all of that, someone capable of breathtaking betrayal without a trace of genuine remorse. Pack a bag, he said quietly. What? Pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I need time to think. Marshall, we can work through this. Couples therapy, communication exercises, whatever you want. I know I made a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake, Ashley. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, and now I'm choosing how to respond. Ashley stared at him for a long moment, and Marshall saw her calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. Finally, she chose defiance. Fine, but when you realize that job would have destroyed us anyway, don't come crying to me. As Marshall watched his wife pack her things, he realized that Ashley had given him an unexpected gift. She'd shown him exactly who she was, and now he was free to show her who he could become. Chapter 6. The plan takes shape. Marshall spent his first night alone in 3 years methodically documenting everything he discovered about Ashley's betrayal. By dawn, he had a comprehensive file that included Felipe Burke's written confession, Carmen Horton's reluctant testimony, and a detailed timeline of Ashley's deception. But evidence of her betrayal wasn't enough. Marshall wanted justice, and he wanted it to be thorough. He called Grant North at 7 a.m. "Marshall," Grant's voice was crisp, professional. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I found out who sabotaged the interview. It was my wife." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Your wife?" "Christ, Marshall, I'm sorry. That's not something I've encountered before. I have proof. Written confessions from the people she manipulated, documentation of how she orchestrated the whole thing. I can have everything to you by this afternoon. Send me what you have." "But Marshall, I need to ask, what's your situation now? Domestically?" "She's moved out temporarily. I'm considering divorce proceedings." "Good. I know that sounds cold, but a spouse actively sabotaging your career isn't just a personal problem. It's a security risk. If I hire you and she decides to target North Technologies directly, that becomes my problem too." Grant was right, though Marshall hadn't considered the broader implications. Ashley knew his work methods, his security protocols, his professional connections. In the wrong hands, that information could be weaponized. "I understand. Give me a week to resolve this completely." "How completely?" Marshall paused, choosing his words carefully. "Completely enough that she'll never be in a position to interfere with anyone's career again." After ending the call, Marshall made a list of everyone who'd been complicit in Ashley's deception. Felipe Burke, who'd created false documents. Carmen Horton, who'd provided guidance while claiming neutrality. And Ashley herself, who'd orchestrated everything. But as Marshall considered his options for revenge, he realized that simply exposing Ashley's betrayal wouldn't be sufficient. She'd shown him that she was willing to destroy other people to get what she wanted. That kind of person didn't learn from consequences, they just got better at avoiding them. Marshall needed to ensure that Ashley faced consequences that would fundamentally change her ability to manipulate others. He started by calling his lawyer, Scott Paul, a sharp-eyed family attorney who'd handled Marshall's real estate purchases and business contracts. Scott had always struck Marshall as the kind of lawyer who enjoyed complicated problems. "Marshall, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need to discuss divorce proceedings." "But it's complicated." "They always are." "How complicated?" Marshall explained Ashley's sabotage in clinical detail, providing times, dates, and evidence. Scott listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "This is career sabotage," Scott said when Marshall finished. "Potentially prosecutable as interference with business relations, depending on how aggressive we want to get. But from a divorce perspective, it's also evidence of marital misconduct that could affect asset distribution." "What do you mean?" "Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but marital misconduct can still influence property division if it relates to the dissolution of the marriage or dissipation of marital assets. Ashley's sabotage directly undermines your earning capacity, which affects the marital estate." Marshall hadn't considered the financial implications. The North Technologies position would have nearly doubled his salary. Ashley's betrayal hadn't just cost him a job. It had cost him years of potential earnings. "I want to file for divorce immediately," Marshall said. "But I also want to file a civil suit for intentional interference with business relations." "That's aggressive. And expensive." "I have evidence. And I want to make sure this never happens again, to me or to anyone else." Scott was quiet for a moment. "Marshall, I need to ask. Are you looking for justice, or are you looking for revenge? What's the difference?" "Justice is proportionate. Revenge is comprehensive." Marshall thought about Ashley's cold smile when she'd finally admitted to sabotaging his career. The way she tried to manipulate him even after being caught. The years of subtle undermining he was only now beginning to recognize. "Both," he said finally. "In that case, I have some ideas. But first, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Go home and make sure Ashley hasn't taken anything that doesn't belong to her. Document everything. Take photos. I have a feeling this is going to get complicated." Marshall returned to his apartment to find that Ashley had been thorough in her temporary departure. She'd taken clothes, jewelry, personal items, and several things that definitely didn't belong to her. His laptop was gone, along with external hard drives containing years of work projects. Bank statements, tax documents, and financial records had been cleaned out of his home office. She'd also taken his grandfather's watch, a vintage Omega that Emmanuel Gilmore had given Marshall on his 18th birthday. Marshall photographed everything, cataloging each missing item with the methodical precision he'd learned from crime scene analysis. By the time he finished, he had evidence of theft to add to the interference charges. But as he worked, Marshall realized that Ashley had made a critical error. She'd taken his work laptop, which meant she now possessed proprietary information belonging to his current employer. That wasn't just theft, it was corporate espionage. Marshall called his boss at his current cybersecurity firm. "Rich, it's Marshall. I need to report a security breach." Rich Dillon had been Marshall's supervisor for 2 years, and he understood the implications immediately. "What kind of breach?" "Personal. My wife has taken my work laptop and external drives containing client data. I need to report it officially and discuss security protocols." "Jesus, Marshall. How much data are we talking about?" 3 years of penetration testing reports, client system analyses, and security protocols for approximately 40 companies. The silence on the other end was ominous. Rich was calculating the potential liability, the damage to client relationships, the regulatory implications. "We need to meet immediately." "And Marshall? This changes your situation significantly. If your wife is attempting to leverage proprietary client data, we're talking about federal crimes." As Marshall drove to his office, he realized that Ashley had just escalated their conflict beyond personal revenge into something much more serious. She'd gone from sabotaging his career to committing federal crimes. And unlike Ashley, Marshall knew exactly how to document, investigate, and prosecute federal crimes. By the end of the week, Ashley would discover that destroying Marshall's dream job had been the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 7. The Net Closes. Ashley felt confident as she sat in the downtown coffee shop waiting for her meeting with Jake Small, a technology reporter from the Chicago Tribune. She'd spent 3 days crafting the perfect narrative, a story about corporate corruption and abuse of power that would make Marshall look like a victim while positioning her as the brave whistleblower. The stolen laptop and hard drives were in her oversized purse, containing what she believed was her insurance policy. If Marshall wanted to play hardball with divorce proceedings, she'd show him what real hardball looked like. Ashley Gilmore. Jake was younger than she'd expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, with the eager expression of someone hungry for his first big story. "Thank you for meeting with me," Ashley said, settling into her carefully chosen persona of reluctant informant. "What I'm about to share could be dangerous for me personally, but I think the public has a right to know." Jake pulled out a digital recorder and notebook, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Take me through it from the beginning." Ashley had rehearsed this story for hours. She painted Marshall as an obsessive cybersecurity specialist who'd been using his position to access confidential client information for personal gain. She claimed he'd been planning to sell proprietary security data to competitors, and that she'd only discovered his scheme when he became desperate to land the North Technologies job. "He was stealing from his own clients," Ashley said, allowing her voice to tremble with the right amount of emotion. "When I confronted him about it, he became violent. I was afraid for my safety, so I took evidence of his crimes and left." "What kind of evidence?" Jake asked, leaning forward. Ashley patted her purse. "Client files, security assessments, proprietary algorithms. Everything needed to prove that he's been running a corporate espionage operation." Jake's pen moved rapidly across his notebook. "Have you taken this to the police?" "I'm afraid to. My husband has connections in law enforcement through his security work. I think they might cover for him." It was a beautiful story, Ashley thought. It cast her as the victim while making Marshall look like both a criminal and a threat. Even if the allegations didn't stick, the mere publication of such accusations would destroy his reputation permanently. "Ms. Gilmore, I need to verify some of these claims before publication. Can you provide me with copies of the documents you mentioned?" "Of course." Ashley reached into her purse, then froze. Standing across the coffee shop, watching her through the window, was Marshall. He wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, FBI agents, based on their posture and professional alertness. Ashley's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Marshall had somehow anticipated her plan and turned it against her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marshall. "Check your email." Now, with trembling fingers, Ashley opened her email to find a message with multiple attachments. The subject line read, "Evidence Package, Ashley Hahn Gilmore." The attachments included Felipe Burke's written confession detailing how Ashley had manipulated him into creating false documents, Carmen Horton's statement about Ashley's premeditated sabotage, bank records showing Ashley had accessed Marshall's accounts to fund her schemes, security footage from Northwestern's administration building showing Ashley meeting with Felipe. But the final attachment was the most damaging, a complete digital forensics report of Marshall's stolen laptop, showing that Ashley had attempted to copy sensitive client files and had researched the market value of proprietary security algorithms. The email concluded with a simple message, "Turn around." Ashley looked up to see Marshall entering the coffee shop with his FBI escorts. Jake Small had disappeared, apparently recognizing law enforcement when he saw it. Ashley Hahn Gilmore, one of the FBI agents, said, approaching her table, "You're under arrest for theft of proprietary information, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." "This is insane," Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was trying to expose crimes, not commit them." "Ma'am, you're in possession of stolen corporate data belonging to multiple companies. Your digital footprint shows you attempted to access and copy sensitive client files. That constitutes federal crimes regardless of your stated intentions." As the agent read Ashley her rights, Marshall approached her table. He looked different, harder, more focused, completely in control of the situation. "You made two critical mistakes," Marshall said quietly. "First, you underestimated how thoroughly I document everything. Second, you assumed I wouldn't be willing to destroy you as completely as you tried to destroy me." "Marshall, please. We can work this out. I'll give everything back. I'll admit I made a mistake. It's too late for that. You crossed a line when you stole proprietary client data that endangered innocent companies and their employees. This isn't about our marriage anymore. It's about national security." The FBI agents escorted Ashley out of the coffee shop in handcuffs. As they passed the window, Marshall saw her looking back at him with an expression of absolute shock. She'd finally encountered someone who played the manipulation game better than she did. Marshall's phone buzzed with a call from Scott Paul. "It's done," Marshall said, answering. "Good. The divorce papers were served an hour ago. Given the federal charges, I don't anticipate much resistance on asset division. How do you feel?" Marshall watched the FBI car disappear into Chicago traffic, carrying away the woman who'd nearly destroyed his career and had instead destroyed her own life. "Like I can finally move forward." As Marshall walked back to his office, he thought about his grandfather's advice: build it right the first time. Marshall had built his career right, his reputation right, his evidence right. Ashley had built her schemes on lies and manipulation, and they'd collapsed the moment they encountered someone who built things to last. Grant North called as Marshall reached his building. "I saw the news about your wife's arrest. Federal charges, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information. She tried to sell client data to competitors." "Christ. Marshall, I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I'm impressed with how you handled it. Most people would have let emotion cloud their judgment. I learned a long time ago that emotion without strategy is just noise." "Well, your strategy was flawless. The job offer stands, assuming you're ready to start fresh." Marshall looked up at the sky, clear and blue above the Chicago skyline. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe freely. "When do I start?" Chapter 8, New Foundations. 3 months later, Marshall stood in Grant North's office, reviewing the quarterly security assessment for their largest client. The work was everything he'd hoped it would be: complex, meaningful, and surrounded by colleagues who shared his passion for excellence. "Outstanding work on the Henderson Industries project," Grant said, closing the report Marshall had submitted. "You've identified vulnerabilities that could have cost them millions." "Thank you, sir. The team made it possible. The team executed your vision." "There's a difference." Marshall had thrown himself into his new role with characteristic intensity, but this time it felt different. At his previous job, he'd been talented but constrained by corporate politics and limited resources. At North Technologies, he was free to pursue innovative solutions with the full support of leadership. His phone buzzed with a text from Craig. "Dinner tonight? There's someone I want you to meet." Marshall smiled. Craig had been trying to set him up on dates since Ashley's arrest, convinced that Marshall needed to get back out there. Marshall appreciated the concern, but he wasn't ready for another relationship. He was still learning to trust his own judgment about people. Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss, Grant continued. I've been thinking about expansion. Opening a West Coast office, maybe bringing in some government contracts. I'd want you to head up the new division. The offer was exactly the kind of opportunity Marshall had dreamed about. More responsibility, cutting-edge projects, the chance to build something from the ground up. 6 months ago, he would have accepted immediately. That's an incredible opportunity, Marshall said. Can I think about it? Grant raised an eyebrow. The old Marshall Gilmore would have said yes before I finished the sentence. The old Marshall Gilmore made some assumptions about what other people wanted that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. Fair point. Take your time. But Marshall, don't let Ashley's betrayal make you afraid of taking risks. She was the risk. The work is just the work. That evening, Marshall met Craig at their usual restaurant, a small Italian place near Marshall's apartment. Craig was already seated at their regular table, and he wasn't alone. Marshall, I want you to meet Dawn Bennett, Craig said, standing as Marshall approached. Dawn, this is the friend I've been telling you about. Dawn Bennett was nothing like Ashley. Where Ashley had been carefully polished and conventionally beautiful, Dawn was natural and understated. She wore minimal makeup, her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was dressed in jeans and a sweater that suggested she valued comfort over impression. Craig's told me a lot about you, Dawn said, shaking Marshall's hand with a firm grip. He says you're the best cybersecurity specialist in Chicago. Craig exaggerates. But I'm good at my job. He also says you recently went through a difficult divorce. Marshall glanced at Craig, who shrugged apologetically. I believe in full disclosure, Craig said. I appreciate honesty, Marshall replied, sitting down across from Dawn. It's been in short supply in my life lately. Dawn smiled. Craig mentioned that too. He said your ex-wife tried to sabotage your career. She succeeded, temporarily, but it worked out better than the alternative. How so? Marshall considered how to explain the past few months without sounding bitter or angry. I learned some important things about myself. About what I want from relationships, about how I evaluate people, about the difference between someone supporting your dreams and someone tolerating them. That's a valuable education, even if it was expensive. Marshall found himself studying Dawn's face as she spoke. She had the kind of direct gaze that suggested she wasn't performing or calculating. She was just present, engaged, genuinely curious about his answer. What about you? Marshall asked. What do you do? I'm a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, so I have some experience with high-stress situations and complicated people. Craig grinned. Dawn's being modest. She's one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history. Craig's being dramatic, Dawn replied. I just work hard and try not to let ego interfere with patient care. Marshall felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine interest in getting to know someone better. Not because they were attractive or charming, but because they seemed like the kind of person who understood the value of competence and integrity. What kind of trauma surgery? Marshall asked. Emergency cases, mostly. Car accidents, workplace injuries, violence-related trauma. People at their worst moments, needing someone to help them survive long enough to get better. That must be incredibly demanding. It is. But it's also incredibly rewarding when you can save someone who might not have made it otherwise. Marshall noticed that Dawn talked about her work the way he talked about his, with passionate engagement rather than obligatory professionalism. She cared about what she did, not just how it looked to other people. How long have you been in trauma surgery? Marshall asked. 8 years. I did my residency here, then stayed on staff. Chicago is a good city for trauma surgery, unfortunately. Dawn grew up here too, Craig added. South Side. Worked her way through college and medical school. Marshall caught the subtext in Craig's comment. Dawn had built her career through merit and determination, not connections or advantages. She understood what it meant to earn success rather than expect it. As dinner progressed, Marshall found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Dawn was intelligent without being competitive, successful without being arrogant, engaging without performing. She asked thoughtful questions about his work and shared stories from the hospital that revealed both her competence and her humanity. I should probably mention, Dawn said as they finished dessert. Craig told me about your situation with your ex-wife. The sabotage, the arrest, all of it. Marshall tensed slightly. And And I think you handled it exactly right. Someone betrays your trust that completely. You document everything and let the legal system sort it out. No drama, no revenge fantasy, just consequences. Some people think I was too harsh. Some people have never had their careers sabotaged by someone who claimed to love them, Dawn replied. You protected yourself and made sure she couldn't do the same thing to someone else. That's not harsh, that's responsible. Marshall felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd been carrying for months. Dawn understood not just what Ashley had done, but why Marshall's response had been necessary. Would you like to have coffee sometime? Marshall asked, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the question. Dawn smiled. I'd like that. But I should warn you. I work weird hours. I'm terrible at returning texts promptly, and I have strong opinions about almost everything. I work long hours. I overthink most decisions, and I've recently learned that my judgment about people needs some calibration. Sounds like we're both honest about our limitations. It's a start. As Marshall walked home that night, he thought about Grant's job offer and Dawn's direct way of engaging with the world. For the first time since Ashley's betrayal, he felt like he could see a future that was built on solid foundations rather than assumptions and hope. He pulled out his phone and sent Grant a text. I'd like to discuss the West Coast position. When can we talk? Then he sent another text to Dawn. Thank you for dinner. How's Saturday afternoon for coffee? The responses came quickly. Grant wrote back, my office, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dawn replied, Saturday works. I know a place that makes excellent coffee and doesn't play music loud enough to drown out conversation. Marshall smiled as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. He was finally ready to start building again. Chapter 9. Earned Victory. 1 year later, Marshall stood on the roof deck of North Technology's new San Francisco office, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. The view was spectacular, but what satisfied him more was the knowledge that he'd earned every moment of it. The West Coast division had exceeded all projections in its first year of operation. Marshall's team had secured contracts with 3 major tech companies, developed innovative security protocols that were setting industry standards, and established North Technologies as a premier cybersecurity firm on both coasts. The quarterly reports look incredible, Grant said, joining Marshall at the railing. Client satisfaction scores are the highest we've ever recorded. The team makes it possible, Marshall replied, though he felt a quiet pride in what they'd accomplished together. Marshall, I've been in business for 25 years, and I've never seen someone build a division this successfully this quickly. You've earned something I don't give out lightly. Grant handed Marshall an envelope. Inside was a contract amendment making Marshall a partner in North Technologies, along with an equity stake that would set him up financially for the rest of his life. Partnership, Marshall said, reading the terms. Grant, this is extraordinary. You've earned extraordinary results. But more than that, you've shown the kind of character I want associated with this company permanently. The way you handled your personal situation last year, that showed me everything I needed to know about your integrity. Marshall thought about Ashley, now serving an 18-month federal sentence for corporate espionage. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, with Ashley receiving minimal assets due to her criminal conviction and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten she'd signed. She'd written him several letters from prison, alternately apologetic and accusatory, but Marshall had returned them unopened. Some chapters of life needed to stay closed. There's something else, Grant continued. I've been approached by the Department of Homeland Security about a cybersecurity initiative. They want North Technologies to lead a task force on critical infrastructure protection. It would be a 5-year contract, significant government work. That's incredible. What would you need from me? I need you to head the entire operation. Move back to Chicago, recruit the best people in the industry, build something that could protect the country's most vital systems. Marshall felt the familiar thrill of a meaningful challenge, but this time he also considered the personal implications. Moving back to Chicago would mean being closer to the life he'd built there, to the people who mattered to him. I'd want Dawn to be part of the decision, Marshall said. Grant smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Bring her out here next week. Let her see what we're building, what this could mean for both of you. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Dawn. Surgery went well. Patient stable. How's the sunset? He replied with a photo of the San Francisco skyline and the message, beautiful, but not as good as Chicago sunsets. Dawn's response was immediate. Smooth talker. See you tomorrow night. Marshall was flying back to Chicago the next morning for what had become a monthly ritual. Dinner with Dawn, coffee with Craig, a quiet weekend reconnecting with the city and people he cared about. The relationship with Dawn had developed slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect rather than passion or convenience. She understood his work demands because hers were equally intense. She appreciated his methodical approach to problems because she'd seen how lives could be saved or lost based on careful preparation and sound judgment. More importantly, Dawn had helped Marshall learn to trust his instincts about people again. She'd been patient while he worked through the lingering effects of Ashley's betrayal, and she'd celebrated his successes without trying to claim credit for them. Are you happy? Grant asked, watching Marshall text with Dawn. Yes, Marshall said, realizing it was the first time in years he could answer that question without qualification. I'm building something worth building with people who deserve my best work. That's all any of us can ask for. As Marshall prepared to leave the office, his phone rang with a call from Felipe Burke. Marshall, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Northwestern's alumni directory. Felipe, how are you? Better. I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges last year. I know you could have destroyed my career, and you chose not to. After Ashley's arrest, Marshall had decided that Felipe's punishment, losing his position at Northwestern and struggling to find work in academic administration, was sufficient consequence for his role in the sabotage. Unlike Ashley, Felipe had been manipulated rather than malicious. You were honest about what happened, Marshall said. That mattered.